Consider the lifeguard dilemma. You are the blue dot. You can rescue a friend to the north or a cluster of strangers to the south. To understand your choice, we look to altruism, behavior undertaken deliberately to benefit someone else for their sake. We often see broad or biological altruism in the animal kingdom. A mother bear puts her life in danger to protect her cubs, but she does so without the conscious, rational intent of acting for their sake. Common sense assumes that true altruism requires total self-sacrifice. It suggests that, unless you suffer a loss, your act isn't truly unselfish. In reality, human behavior is often driven by mixed motives. You might drive cautiously through a neighborhood to protect children, while simultaneously wanting to avoid a reckless driving ticket. The self-interested desire to stay out of trouble does not invalidate the altruistic desire to keep others safe. Altruism is defined by the presence of a specific, targeted vector in our motivational architecture. It is the decision to act for the sake of the other. Psychological egoism is the doctrine that all human action is ultimately motivated by self-interest. It claims that even our most charitable acts are secretly aimed at our own good. This theory relies on an a priori assumption about the human mind, the desire as hunger model. This is a philosophical deduction made from the armchair rather than through experimental evidence. When we are hungry, we want food, but we do not want the food for its own sake. We want it to achieve an internal feeling of satisfaction. Psychological egoists argue that all desires function like this closed loop. We only help others to get the hit of feeling good about ourselves. This model fails because many desires aim at external realities we may never experience. A parent sets up a trust fund for their child's future, long after the parent is dead. They won't feel the future satisfaction. The desire targets the child's prosperity. If desires can target external outcomes without an internal reward loop, the primary philosophical defense for universal egoism fails. It suggests that humans can act for another's sake. If we accept this possibility, we must then ask, what is the rational justification for doing so? Three distinct architectures attempt to bridge the gap between self and other: eudaimonism, impartial reason, and sentimentalism. Eudaimonism was the central ethical orientation of antiquity. It is built upon eudaimonia, the Greek word for the highest good, translated as flourishing or well-being. This framework assumes that every human act aims at a hierarchy of goods, all of which eventually lead to the highest good, your own flourishing. Critiques of eudaimonism often mistake it for simple selfishness. To understand it, we must distinguish between instrumental means and constituents. Instrumental means are tools used to get a reward, like money used to buy food. Constituents are the actual ingredients of well-being itself. In eudaimonism, virtues like justice and generosity are constituents of a good life. You do not perform them to receive a separate prize. Performing them is the reward. This model allows us to love others for their own sake, because exercising our social and emotional skills in this way is part of our own excellent functioning. Eudaimonism reaches its architectural limit during acts of strong altruism. It struggles to justify a permanent loss to your own well-being for a total stranger. Eudaimonism expands the definition of the self to include the welfare of others, but it remains anchored in the premise of self-interest. The second architecture, impartial reason, demands a God's-eye perspective. It requires us to set aside emotional bias and ask what anyone should do. Philosopher Thomas Nagel described this as the impersonal standpoint. Nagel argues that the fact that a specific person is you generates no special rational weight. Reasons must be agent-neutral. Agent-neutral reasons are justifications for action that apply to everyone equally, regardless of their personal relationship to the situation. From this objective standpoint, you are merely one node among billions. If pain is objectively bad, it gives every rational agent a reason to stop it, regardless of whose body it is in. This architecture takes two forms. Weak impartiality allows adults to prioritize their own welfare within reasonable limits. Consequentialism is far more radical. It dictates that we must always act to maximize the greatest balance of good over bad in the world. Consequentialism deflates the self. You must treat your own well-being and your friends as having no more weight than a complete stranger's. Nagel warned that this objective standpoint creates a problem of volume. The immense amount of value and suffering in the world threatens to swamp the individual's life, leaving no room for their own interests. Impartial reason achieves altruism by erasing the special status of the self, but it demands an almost impossible level of rational detachment. Sentimentalism is the third architecture. It grounds altruism in compassion, sympathy, and personal affection, the heart rather than the head. Immanuel Kant was the primary opponent of this view. He argued that acts driven by emotional sympathy have no genuine moral worth. For Kant, moral worth is found only when an act is driven by duty, following a universal, rational rule, regardless of how you feel. Consider Kant's depressed philanthropist. His own misfortunes have extinguished all feeling for others. He helps people not because he wants to, but because he believes he has a moral duty to do so. Kant views this joyless, dutiful action as the highest moral state. Sentimentalists use Robert Nozick's experience machine to counter the idea that we only help others to feel good. If you could plug in and feel the joy of helping without doing anything, a compassionate person would still choose real-world impact over simulated feeling. Take the example of an author who spends her time reading to the blind. She has no moral obligation to do so. She acts because she loves literature and spontaneously wants to share that joy. Sentimentalists argue her motive is deeply admirable. This relies on the concept of fittingness. Just as grief is the fitting response to death, compassion is the fitting response to another's suffering. Under this architecture, Kant's joyless philanthropist suffers a severe moral defect. He lacks the appropriate emotional resonance to connect with the humanity he serves. Sentimentalism posits that appropriate emotional resonance is the very foundation of altruistic behavior. Applying these frameworks to reality dictates entirely different actions for the same set of facts. Imagine a person donating money to a cancer charity to honor a mother who died of the disease. Consequentialism would reject this donation if the money could save more lives elsewhere, perhaps by funding malaria nets in another country. Sentimentalism validates the donation as the proper expression of a profound, long-term emotional bond. Now consider the drowning child. You must choose between stopping to save one drowning stranger in front of you or walking past them to attend a meeting that will save hundreds of unseen strangers. Sentimentalism pulls you toward the immediate, visceral need of the child. Impartial reason dictates that you must suppress that empathy to save the hundreds you cannot see. Altruism is a complex cognitive and philosophical framework. It asks us to define how we relate to the needs of those around us. Acting for the sake of another is only fully admirable when it is tied to an accurate definition of well-being. How much we owe to others is not a biological given. It depends on which rational architecture we choose to build our lives upon.